My childhood home vanished. My Emile sold it behind my back. But I had a secret plan. One that would humiliate her in front of everyone. She grew up in a modest, sun-washed house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, where the paint chipped gently with time and the floorboards whispered memories beneath her feet. The scent of her mother's baking lingered in the kitchen walls, even years after the oven cooled. In spring, lilacs bloomed just outside her bedroom window, their scent drifting in to mix with the dust of old books and childhood dreams. The backyard wasn't large, but to her it was endless, where she built crooked forts, scraped her knees, and watched fireflies paint the dusk with tiny lanterns. Her father once carved her name into the bark of the old oak tree near the fence, and though the letters had softened with time, she knew exactly where to trace her fingers. The house echoed with the warmth of laughter, of whispered bedtime stories, of grief and joy interwoven through the years. Every corner held a piece of her. The hallway where she took her first steps, the living room where she watched her parents dance when they thought no one was looking. Even the creaky stair near the top that always gave her away felt like a part of her story. She didn't just remember this place, she carried it in her bones. It was more than four walls and a roof. It was the place that had quietly shaped her, held her through the chaos of growing up, and wrapped itself around her like a second skin. It wasn't just home, it was her beginning. When she married into his family, she hoped to carry the warmth of her childhood into something new, something shared. But almost immediately, there was a coldness beneath the smiles, a subtle shift in the air whenever her mother-in-law entered the room. The woman was polite, always smiling just enough, always saying the right things, but there was something calculated in her gaze, something that made her feel small in her presence. She'd rearranged the family photos on the mantel during visits, placing her own face front and center while quietly tucking away the older ones. She called the old house quaint, with a wrinkled nose, questioned why they still held on to such a dated place. At family dinners, she'd compliment the meal, and then mention how hers was just a little more refined. It wasn't overt, not cruel on the surface, but each remark chipped away at the sense of belonging. Her opinions seeped into conversations like oil and water, smooth but impossible to ignore. Over time, she began to realize that this woman didn't just want to be included. She wanted control. She had a talent for wrapping judgment in compliments, for planting doubt while pretending to support. Her presence grew heavier each month, her voice louder in decisions that didn't concern her. What was once a hopeful connection began to feel like a quiet invasion. There were no arguments, no open conflict, only a lingering tension that thickened like smoke, and beneath it all, a quiet truth forming in the shadows. This woman was not on her side. It started with a strange silence. One weekend, she decided to drive past the old house, hoping to feel grounded again, to steal a moment of comfort from the familiar. But something was wrong. The swing in the front yard was gone, the flower bed stripped bare, the mailbox replaced. At first, she thought it was a renovation. But then the truth unfolded in layers too cruel to comprehend. A neighbor, casually walking her dog, mentioned that the house had sold 2 weeks ago. The new owners planning to tear it down. Her breath caught. Panic spread through her chest like wildfire. She hadn't sold it. She hadn't even known it was listed. The key, once hidden under the loose brick, was no longer there. Windows that once held holiday decorations were now stripped of personality. She scrambled to call her husband, questions crashing over each other, but his confusion only mirrored her own. The paperwork had been handled quietly, in her absence, signed over through power of attorney, transferred without warning. Her mother-in-law, with her practiced smile and carefully crafted concern, had maneuvered behind the scenes. She'd accessed old documents, exploited legal gaps, and made a decision she had no right to make. The betrayal wasn't just in the act. It was in the secrecy, the ease with which something so sacred had been discarded. There were no calls, no discussions, not even a warning. Her past had been sold like a forgotten trinket at a flea market, stripped from her hands without so much as a goodbye. The home that had once anchored her now belonged to strangers, and the woman who had taken it from her walked around as if nothing had happened. She didn't scream, she didn't confront, and she didn't beg for answers. Instead, she turned her silence into something sharper, something calculated. The pain had settled into her bones, but it brought with it a clarity she hadn't known before. If her mother-in-law wanted to play quiet games, then she would answer with something louder, something public. She began collecting pieces of her past, photos from old albums, handwritten letters from her parents, childhood drawings, even recordings of birthday songs sung in the kitchen of that house. She curated them carefully, framing each moment not as nostalgia but as loss, an archive of what had been stolen. When the annual community fundraiser approached, the same event her mother-in-law prided herself on chairing each year, she submitted a last-minute entry to the silent auction, a photography exhibit titled Inherited Silence. It was presented as an anonymous donation, but it didn't need a name. The display was striking, black and white images of her childhood home layered with captions describing the small moments that had once made it sacred. Beneath one image of the worn front steps, the caption read, "Where I waited for my father to come home. Sold without my consent." Whispers spread quickly through the room as guests began to realize the meaning behind the collection. The tension was immediate, sharp. Her mother-in-law stood nearby, stiff, her smile faltering as eyes turned to her with quiet judgment. No accusations were shouted, no scenes made, but the message had landed. Reputation was everything to that woman. And now it was unraveling in front of the very people she had tried to impress. The room that had always applauded her now watched in silence. And for the first time, she had to feel what it was like to lose something she couldn't control. In the days that followed, the exhibit lingered in the minds of those who had seen it. Conversations shifted when her mother-in-law entered the room. Polite smiles replaced by quiet glances and awkward pauses. No one confronted her directly, but the air around her had changed. She felt it in the way people no longer asked for her advice, in the distance that grew between her and the spotlight she once craved. But for the woman who had lost her home, the silence wasn't enough to heal what had been taken. She returned one last time to the property, now gutted and stripped of life, the walls bare and the garden gone. The oak tree had been cut down. All that remained was dirt and memory. She stood there, surrounded by ghosts only she could see, and let the weight of it settle. There was no justice that could bring the house back, no apology that could replace the smell of her mother's perfume in the hallway or the echo of her father's footsteps on the stairs. But there was a strange peace in knowing the truth had been seen. Her grief had been witnessed. The woman who tried to erase her past now carried the stain of what she had done, not in courtrooms or in headlines, but in the silence of a community that no longer admired her. And though the house was gone, the memories had survived, carried not in wood or glass, but in her, the only place they ever truly belonged.